not in time list, but I think it's okay. So sorry for that. I'm pleased to invite our second speaker. It's Associate Professor from National University of Kyiv Mohyla Academy in Kyiv, Dr. Tatiana Kyselova, with the thematic of dialogue, inclusion, dilemma in Ukraine. Please, Tatiana, are you with us? Yes.
Thank you very much. Do you hear me?
Yes, yes, we can hear you.
Can I share the screen, because I've got slides?
Yeah, great. Just if you know how to, yes, just share the screen.
Okay, it says host disabled participants screen sharing. Can you enable it?
I feel that this version of Zoom doesn't
Dear Tatiana, please, if you can make it through the share.
Participants.
Where?
Multiple participants can share.
Okay, yes, Francesco, you are.
I guess. Oh, here. Multiple. Is it possible now?
Let me see. Yes. Do you see it now?
Yes.
Yeah, dear colleagues, I still have 20 minutes, right?
Of course, you have all your time, because you have 20 minutes and 5 minutes discussion. Sorry. Yes, of course.
Good. Good. Thank you very much. First of all, thank you, Benjamin, and thank you, Professor Krastelina, for letting me know about this conference and jumping in very last moment. But I'm very happy. I also take this opportunity to connect to the International Association for Reconciliation, because indeed reconciliation is very multidisciplinary field. And I do research on mediation and dialogue and reconciliation from more sociological and political science perspective. And today I'm presenting a kind of summary of 3 different studies on dialogues and different aspects of dialogues, and particularly this, the main study I'm presenting was done with Dr. Anna Holper from Viadrina University, Frankfurt Oder. They have a very beautiful center for peace mediation, and I'm a director of Mediation and Dialogue Research Center at Kyiv Mohyla Academy. And I'm very happy to see today colleagues from Kyiv Mohyla Academy, Professor Hirnik, and my PhD student, Olesa. She will be also presenting. So hopefully from today, we will have more connection with your association. And today I would like to talk a little bit about dialogues in Ukraine, what's going on. And we heard from the previous speakers a lot about internal processes of reconciliation, and the main question whether reconciliation is possible during the hot phase of the conflict. And as a practitioner of mediation and dialogue, I work with United Nations agencies and with OSCE agencies, and I would say, yes, it's happening. It's happening already right now, and I have done monitoring studies of these processes. And I really think that there are certain bubbles of professional communities who are working on the conflict. And psychologists, as I understand, most people in this virtual conference are psychologists, is one bubble. Mediators and dialogue facilitators is the other bubble. And there is a huge bubble of human rights NGOs and civil society and others who are working on the conflict, and I really think we should connect. So I talk about dialogue in a mediation and dialogue facilitation sense. I give very brief outline of dialogue landscape in Ukraine. I talk about dialogue in the context of reconciliation and transitional justice. And finally, I will speak about one of the problems that we encountered in dialogues from sociological and institutional point of view. It's a problem of inclusion of pro-Russian group of people or people holding pro-Russian political views. So what is dialogues? That was a question that was asked many, many times since 2014. And it took local dialogue facilitators and mediators maybe 3 years to give a proper answer to this question. So there is a very clear, at the moment, very clear conception of facilitated dialogues that works in practice. First of all, we work at tracks 2 and 3, which is more or less civil society. There are, of course, mediation and dialogue processes taking place in Minsk, but this is track 1. We work with people with grassroots level. And facilitated dialogues are specially prepared meetings between people or groups. It can't be spontaneous. It should be carefully prepared. Most importantly, facilitated dialogues should have professional facilitators. In Ukraine, we do have a large community of professional dialogue facilitators. Even before 2014, there were 3,000 people trained in mediation skills. Now there are, I guess, more than 10,000 people who have been trained as mediators. The goal of these processes, the goal is twofold. Every dialogue, in our understanding, should have a component of trust building or perhaps some kind of reconciliation, bridge building, and based a lot in psychology. And that's enough for dialogue. But some dialogues on top of trust building and relationship building can also have a decision-making function. And this is very specific Ukrainian understanding of dialogue, and I will show why. In terms of methodologies, it can be anything, beginning from non-violent communication of Marshall Rosenberg to town hall meetings, to playback theater or theater of oppressed. There are 34 different methodologies that practitioners currently use worldwide for facilitated dialogues. And in order to understand how dialogues, including reconciliation dialogues, look like in Ukraine, we did several studies. One that I refer on this slide is survey-based study, where we identified through online survey, we identified 157 dialogue processes, proper facilitated dialogue processes, according to the definition presented before, by 66 organizations. That's quite a lot. And from 18 to 20, there are many more others. Where these dialogues taking place, of course, in the East, because that's where donor money goes to. But there are 2 other regions. Well, Kyiv, of course, that's always happens, but there is also Zakarpattia and Odessa, Kherson regions, which are all also very conflict-driven regions for their own reasons. What kind of dialogues we identified? Well, there is a continuum of dialogues. And there are 2 parts of dialogues. One part, which I called technical dialogues, and the other part, red part, is existential, or I would think that psychologists would call it reconciliation dialogues. And in technical dialogues, people speak about reforms, decentralization, healthcare, education. People talk about involvement of civil society into local government, about all different problems in communities, from building schools to repairing houses after shelling. There are a lot of dialogues on integration of war veterans and internally displaced persons into host communities, and dialogues about human rights and inclusivity. So this blue part of dialogue continuum sometimes can be called problem-solving workshops. And I guess, yeah, a lot of psychologists would say, yeah, these are not dialogues. But this is Ukrainian specifics. Local dialogue facilitators call it dialogues. So we as researchers follow this path. More interesting for you, I guess, is the red part of the continuum. These are dialogues about religion, interfaith relationships, the future of Ukraine, the past of Ukraine, relationship between Russia and Ukraine, political views of Ukrainians, and conflict in the East as such. And within this red group of dialogues, we actually had a few dialogues which were truly about reconciliation. They included people from non-governmentally controlled areas or temporarily occupied territories. There are very few, honestly, and as a researcher, we have difficulty identifying them, but they do happen. And people in these dialogues talked about possible amnesties, about restoring trust, restoring relationships between GCA and non-GCA and many other things. Well, overall, there are more technical dialogues than reconciliation dialogues, 90 to 10%. And the new impetus for dialogues in Ukraine will be brought by the process of transitional justice. I also think it makes sense for people working on reconciliation in Ukraine to connect to a large group of researchers who are working now on transitional justice, including people from the Ministry of Reintegration and Temporary Occupied Territories, and including people from the Parliament. And the concept of transitional justice has been just revealed, and well, it's still in the process. Within transitional justice, there is a big question: what is reconciliation for Ukraine? Whom do we reconcile with? And partly my Ukrainian colleague has talked about this. I think at the moment there is certain consensus that Ukrainians have to reconcile among themselves, basically. Ukraine has to become stronger, more resilient country, and more inclusive society. But there is always a question if reintegration and deoccupation ever takes place. And we all hope that it happens. One day it happens, and political will somewhere in Minsk will still work out. Then there is a huge challenge of reintegrating the temporarily occupied territories. And then where transitional justice and reconciliation processes will be officially launched as post-conflict processes. But we argue as researchers in our publication, which I cited on this slide, that certain steps on reconciliation, even with the people from NGCA, can be taken now, and they are already happening. And I know a few processes. Within overall dialogue and peace building and reconciliation processes, however, we found one problem, which is more challenge, is that if you look at all the dialogue processes, hundreds of dialogues happening now in Ukraine, supported by international organizations, these dialogues overall do not really include people, Ukrainians. I'm not talking about people from NGCA. Those Ukrainians who are living on the controlled territories, within these dialogues, we have around 20% that include one or two persons representing pro-Russian political views. Then, well, whether this is a problem or not, it's another big question, because during hot phase of the conflict, do you have to include someone who is seen by certain people as enemy? And according to international standards, United Nations standards, Ukrainian dialogue standards, yes, you have to. Dialogues have to be inclusive and have to include political other, as we call them, and people holding these views are from 10 to 26% in Ukraine. Then the question, if these people are excluded from dialogues and reconciliation processes, why? And myself and Dr. Hope wrote an article on inclusion dilemmas, and it is in print now. It will be published in Peace and Conflict Journal. Interestingly, we ended up in peace psychology, but it's very, very interdisciplinary research. So we did 3 focus groups and 47 in-depth interviews with very proper scientific methodology. And we are trying to explain why why people holding pro-Russian political views are currently excluded from dialogues and peace-building processes. Number one explanation is the absence of inclusion agenda at all levels, basically. At the level of government, official narrative of the conflict is a narrative of Russian aggression, and it can't be anything else. As a citizen and as a political scientist, I understand why overall narrative of the conflict in Ukraine is a narrative of Russian aggression, but this narrative comes into conflict with inclusion processes and peace-building processes. And now with Zelensky presidency, it started slowly changing. It's somehow expanding from exclusive narrative of the conflict towards little bit more inclusive and diverse narrative, which includes different perspectives of different citizens in Ukraine. But it's still nowhere close to the agenda of inclusion. Civil society in Ukraine is as divided as the whole society. There is part of pro-peace civil society, and there is a part of pro-war civil society. Internationals, including UN, OSCE, and all the others, they just do not dare to open this Pandora box of inclusion. So overall, the discourse is still very much against inclusion of citizens holding pro-Russian political views into peace processes. Now, even if there is such narrative, even if one day political will arises towards more inclusive Ukrainian society, there is a problem of identifying these people First of all, the Russian-Ukrainian conflict is not an ethnic or ethno-linguistic conflict, and I will not explain it to this audience. It's all clear. But this actually means that the identities are blurred and shifting, and it's very, very difficult to understand who is who in Ukraine and who holds which political views. Even if it's possible to identify, or even if people holding pro-Russian views are self-identified and they're willing to speak, it's nearly impossible to include them, because practically when our dialogue facilitators come to the fields, come to the local communities in the East, and they would like, for example, to include people with diverse opinions, they are not able to identify politically others, people holding pro-Russian views, because they lack agency. They're not organized, and for good reasons. We know that for security reasons, a lot of Russian cultural organizations were banned in Ukraine, and that's the only way to do. But the problem remains. You cannot identify them. Even if you can identify these people, there are high security risks. There were a couple of cases when there were physical attacks at dialogues, during dialogues by far-right extremist groups. Dialogues were accused of working for Kremlin propaganda. There were lots of problems with Russian-Ukrainian dialogues. So physical security is a problem. Yet the even worse problem is indirect, real or perceived risks of empowering pro-Russian constituencies. And we all know that, that Russia used certain parts of civil society in Ukraine to instigate uprising in Donbass. So these are really difficult problems. But even if identification problem and security problem is mitigated, and you have people from with diverse opinions, with pro-Russian political opinions at the table for the dialogues, what we actually find is that dialogues, in the end of the day, transform their identities. We have identified at least 3 cases in our interviews when people with pro-Russian political views were transformed into dual or inclusive plural identities. So then the question is about dialogues as such, and we call it dialogue dilemma: acknowledge versus assimilate, inclusion as a recognition, inclusion as integration. And at this point, we stop our study, because that's an open question. The practice in Ukraine doesn't have an answer to this question, and research, I'm afraid, also doesn't have an answer to this question. So this is a question for further research and cooperation, especially with colleagues with psychology background. And finally, all the publications that are referred to, including very recent publication on dialogue and transitional justice, are published at the web page of my Mediation Dialogue Research Center and Center for Peace and Mediation. That's it. Thank you very much.
Hey, dear Dr. Kyselova, it was really deep, and I think this, for me, it's kind of voice from Ukraine, and it's important to hear that, because you can see there's these different approaches. There's opinions, and there is a lot of small dialogues and a lot of conversation that goes around this issue, and it's very important for me that it's very big civil discussion, not just on media sources that we can see probably promoted by some groups of interest, but from the people that comes and their struggle to connect. I think there is a good proposal. Then, if someone has question for the next time, you can write it on our chat, so we can just pick up those questions after the report, and we can ask the person who is making the report. Please, friends, if someone have a question or someone have something to Dr. Tatiana Kyselova, please just.
Professor Garachenko left her hand.
Where?
Raised her hand.
Okay, yes, please. Okay, please. Olesya?
Yes?
Okay, did you raise your hand? Hello?
No, not.
Okay, great. So if someone has, so for the next time, thank you. For the next time, you can just write on the chat. So we have this question. Also, we will have time in the end, I hope, and tomorrow we have for more open discussion. So if you have some questions, some proposal, because topics are very interesting. Yes, please, Professor. Yes, because it's very close to me.
So thank you, Tatiana, very much for this presentation. It was really very, very interesting to listen what your research and how many dialogues we have in Ukraine. I just have one question, because we worked also on acknowledgement and recognition issues, because it's very important that recognition is a very positive factor for reconciliation. We found out in several researches. Our next step will be to see what different kinds of recognition have as an effect. You can recognize somebody as a person, for example, for his suffering, for his achievements, for his political views, for his common humanity, for being part of a great nation or a great group. And our hope in working, especially in Israel and Palestine, is to open up new possibilities of dialogue if we make more researches on different kinds of recognition, different types of recognition, to recognize also facts, but also persons, their histories, their sufferings, the history of the person, the history of the group, the history of the village, the common history, the history of a nation, of a culture. And so I would like to ask you whether you have some insights in this and worked on this in your research as well.
Yeah, thank you very much for the question. Well, actually, recognition is very much a part of dialogues, but not those blue ones, not the technical ones. Also, some technical dialogues also include this element, but more existential types of dialogues, and there are all different approaches to recognition. For example, there was still is a project which is called Narratives in Conflict, and this is a dialogue project which was launched by OSCE SMM, Dialogue Facilitation Officer. But there are similar projects done by human rights organizations. What they actually do, as a first stage towards dialogue, this project collect different narratives of the conflict. There are all kinds of different experiences. There are lots of sufferings from both sides. There are people who were abused and tortured by the Ukrainian army, and these stories are being collected by a lot of organizations. And then after collecting the stories, the methodology of these types, working with narratives, and brings people together and discuss these stories. It's very much recognition of different experiences of the conflict. There are quite a few projects of these types, but in terms of recognition, people and diversity of people, this is a part of a lot of dialogues. For example, a big part of dialogues which use theatrical methodologies, playback theater. These are dialogues. In our understanding, these are facilitated dialogues. It's a lot about recognition, about understanding the diversity and so on. So there are quite a lot of processes. If we want to understand them deeply, how it works in practice, we have to do more research on that. I'm open for any suggestions. Finally, within the transitional justice movement, we wrote a paper which explains how dialogue can be used as a part of reconciliation and narrative formation process. And just talking about sensitive topics like amnesty, let's say, you can't do it without process of recognition. It's simply not possible. Recognition is the part of existential dialogues. So there will be more processes on reconciliation and dialogues within transitional justice, and we are negotiating this with the government now.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, dear Dr. Kyselova.
There is another question.
Yes, that's okay. Okay, yeah, did you see that from Katya? Does official Ukrainian politics? I didn't see. May you ask it for online? We just read it. Okay. The question from. Okay, please, Katya, please say it. Please connect with us and say it was be wonderful to meet you, to see you.
Yeah, I would just like to have the answer to this question at some of the points. If you do not find it reasonable now, it can go to later, but I think it would be interesting to also hear it from Ms. Kyselova if there is some approach from the official Ukrainian politics towards the dialogue on the track 2 and 3 level.
Okay, so very interesting question. Yes.
Yeah, with the dialogue on track 2 and 3, it took dialogue, facilitation community and civil society perhaps 5 years to push government at least to understand the concept, because it's enormously difficult to explain a public servant or bureaucrat what is reconciliation, what is recognition, what is dialogue. It's so difficult. But at the moment, there were a lot of efforts invested into training public officials, into connection with the government. And if you look at the very last strategical documents, policy documents of the government, for example, action plan by the Cabinet of Ministers and action plan of the Ministry of Reintegration, you will see were dialogues, and we are quite happy. They included at least the word dialogue into the documents. They may not understand fully what it means, but we are working towards this. Then if you see the strategy of, or the concept of transitional justice, it hasn't been published yet, but it's been discussed in the expert community. They mentioned dialogue 2 times. What we have at the moment from the government, they recognize the need for dialogue. This is step number 1, because what kind of dialogue, how it looks like, how institutionally dialogue infrastructure can look like in Ukraine, they have no idea at the moment. And civil society also, they have different ideas. For example, some parts of civil society would love to have national dialogue. And I think this is something that Benjamin referred to, because although we have a lot of grassroots dialogues that I monitor and research, we actually still lack a national discourse on dialogue. And there were 2 or 3 parallel processes trying to establish this type of discourse or infrastructure. And I personally not sure that we need national dialogues. On all these big structures, lots of risks. At the moment, I'm against this, but that's the situation with the government and dialogues at the moment.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for the discussion and for presentation.